We have finally done it. We've become the masters of our world, or so we believe. Our rockets defy gravity, tearing through the sky to carry our ambitions to Mars and beyond. In our gleaming laboratories, we rewrite the very source code of life, editing our own biology as if it were simple text. We have built artificial minds in vast, humming data centers, digital gods that learn, predict, and perhaps one day dream. We tell ourselves we are the pinnacle of history, the first, the only, the inevitable result of millennia of progress. This is the story of now. But this story, as clean and comforting as it is, has a crack. It's an anomaly in the code, a ghost in our history that stubbornly refuses to be explained. You can feel it when you stand in the shadow of something truly impossible. Travel to Baalbek in modern-day Lebanon. There, in the foundations of a Roman temple, you will find stone blocks weighing over 1,000 tons. Our largest mobile cranes today would buckle trying to lift even one. How were they moved? And more importantly, why? This anomaly is not an isolated case. It is a global pattern. Fly across the world to the desolate, high plains of Bolivia, to a place called Pumapunku. Here, at 13,000 feet, we find ruins of andesite, one of the hardest stones on Earth, cut with a precision that seems to defy logic. We find H-blocks that interlock with machine-like perfection, as if they came from a high-tech factory. Or travel to the highlands of Peru, to the fortress of Sacsayhuaman. Its walls are an impossibly complex jigsaw of giant, polygonal stones, some weighing over 100 tons, all fit together so perfectly that not even a razor blade can pass between them. The story we are told is that these were built by fledgling civilizations using simple tools, copper chisels, and brute force. We are taught that these people, who had supposedly just discovered farming, also achieved feats of engineering that would bankrupt a modern nation. Does this make sense? Or is this just the profound arrogance of the present, the hubris of now? We look at these sites and call their builders primitive, while standing utterly baffled by their achievements. We are a civilization with amnesia, staring at our own past and failing to recognize it. What if our entire model of history is built on a single, fundamentally flawed assumption? The assumption that we are the first, that progress is a simple, straight line from a cave to a rocket ship. What if this is a lie? What if the echoes of a golden age, the persistent global myths of a time when gods walked the earth and shared knowledge, aren't myths at all? What if they are memories, the fractured, fading memory of a civilization that rose, built wonders, and then fell all before we ever learned to write our own name? One man tried to give us a name for this memory, the Greek philosopher Plato. He told a story he insisted was absolutely true, a story passed down from the highest priests of Egypt. It was the story of a mighty, seafaring civilization, a technological marvel that ruled a vast empire from its island capital. He gave us a name that has haunted our imagination ever since: Atlantis. For centuries, we have dismissed this as an allegory, a simple moral fable about a proud civilization destroyed by its own arrogance. In our rush to dismiss the story, we have overlooked the most important detail Plato gave us. It wasn't just a name, it was a date. He wrote that Atlantis was destroyed 9,000 years before his own time. This is not the familiar world of Bronze Age kings and warring Greek states. Do the math. This places its final, catastrophic destruction at roughly 9,600 BC. This date, 9,600 BC, is the key. It throws us out of recorded history and into the darkness of the deep past, a time we know almost nothing about. This date lands us squarely in a moment of unbelievable geological violence, the very end of the last ice age. This was a time when the world's ice sheets were catastrophically melting, a time of superfloods and a sea level rise that would eventually drown an area of land the size of 2 continents. Mainstream archaeology tells us that at 9,600 BC, all of humanity consisted of small, scattered bands of hunter-gatherers. But what if Plato was right? What if there was another civilization, a predecessor, that was swallowed by the sea at the dawn of our own? This investigation is not about finding a magical city or a sunken palace. It is about a timeline. It is a quest to find the ghost of a lost epoch. We are not just questioning a myth, we are questioning the very foundation of human history. The central, terrifying question is this: did we build our modern world on the ruins of another? And did that lost world, that Atlantis, possess technologies that, in ways we can barely comprehend, were even more advanced than our own? Plato gave us more than a name. He gave us a coordinate, a single, specific, and bizarrely precise date for the fall of Atlantis, 9,000 years before his own time. For millennia, this number was dismissed as pure fiction. Our history books told us civilization was a recent invention, starting with the Sumerians and Egyptians around 3000 BC. Plato's date of 9600 BC was simply impossible, a fantasy. But in the last few decades, modern science has given us the tools to read the deep planetary record, and what we found at that exact moment in time is not fantasy. It's an apocalypse. Let's wind back the clock. For tens of thousands of years, our planet was in the grip of a brutal ice age. Massive ice sheets, miles high, covered much of the northern hemisphere. Then, around 13,000 years ago, the planet began to warm. The ice began to melt. Humanity was on the verge of a new world. And then, without warning, the climate didn't just change. It broke. This event is what geologists call the Younger Dryas. It was a 1,200-year-long cold shock, a mini ice age that plunged the world back into a deep freeze, accompanied by catastrophic ecological change. But the real story, the one that aligns perfectly with Plato's timeline, is the end of the Younger Dryas. Around 9600 BC, the deep freeze terminated as violently as it began. The warming was abrupt, radical, and catastrophic. We are still piecing together the exact cause, with leading theories pointing to cometary fragment impacts. But the effects are undeniable. We see evidence of continent-spanning floods, global black mats of soot from widespread fires, and the mass extinction of nearly all large Ice Age animals. This was not a gentle thaw. This was a global convulsion. The most profound effect was on the oceans. The melting of the world's ice sheets was not a gentle trickle. It came in great, catastrophic pulses. Geologists call them meltwater pulses. The greatest of these, which marks the end of this period, unleashed unimaginable volumes of water. The oceans of the world rose, and they rose fast. In total, the sea level climbed by 400 feet. 400 feet. This is not a small, local flood. This is the redrawing of the entire planet's coastlines. Take a moment to truly comprehend that number. 400 feet. Now look at a map of the world. Imagine our own coastlines. All of our greatest cities, New York, London, Tokyo, Shanghai, would be gone, buried under hundreds of feet of water. In total, over 10 million square miles of coastal land, the most prime real estate on the planet, vanished. An area the size of Europe and China combined was simply erased from the earth, submerged and then buried by millennia of silt. This is the single most important and most overlooked fact. If a great maritime civilization existed, this is where its ruins would be. This is the 12,000-year-old problem. The orthodox story of history says this is when it all began. That out of this chaos, traumatized hunter-gatherers, scattered and few, slowly picked up the pieces. Over the next 6,000 years, they would invent farming, then build small villages, and finally create cities. This is the story of a slow, gradual beginning. But what if this isn't the story of a beginning at all? What if it's the story of a restart? What if the catastrophe didn't start civilization, but ended one? For decades, this gradual start model was unquestioned. And then, on a barren hilltop in southern Turkey, archaeologists unearthed a site that rewrites human history. It's called Göbekli Tepe. It is a stunning complex of massive, T-shaped limestone pillars, some weighing over 20 tons, carved with intricate and sophisticated depictions of animals and symbols. It is a massive megalithic complex built with an understanding of astronomy and engineering that is breathtaking. It is, without question, the work of a complex, organized, and skilled society. Here is the part that changes everything. The scientific dating of Göbekli Tepe is indisputable. It was built and then intentionally buried around 11,600 years ago. Let's do the math. That is almost 7,000 years before the Great Pyramid of Giza. It's 6,000 years before Stonehenge. It is older than writing, older than pottery, older than agriculture. It was built before the Great Cataclysm of 9,600 BC. This site should not exist. According to our old timeline, the people who built this were supposed to be simple hunter-gatherers, living in huts and chasing deer. Simple hunter-gatherers do not quarry, move, and erect 20-ton megaliths into perfect astronomical alignments. This is the anomaly. This is the smoking gun. Göbekli Tepe is the impossible echo of a lost world. The sheer sophistication of the site, appearing from nowhere, throws our entire timeline into chaos. It forces us to ask a terrifying, wonderful question. What if the builders of Göbekli Tepe weren't inventing architecture and astronomy? What if they were the survivors? What if this incredible site was a last, desperate act? A library of stone, built by the last heirs of a much older, more advanced civilization, frantically trying to preserve the knowledge of a world that was being washed away. This brings us to the great challenge, the central argument of every skeptic, and it is a fair one. If this civilization existed, they ask, where is the rest of the evidence? Where are the 12,000-year-old laptops? Where are the steel girders, the plastic factories, the silicon chips? If they were truly advanced, surely they would have left the same kinds of industrial scars we have. This question, more than any other, has relegated the topic of a predecessor civilization to the realm of fantasy. But this question rests on a critical and perhaps fatal assumption. That assumption is that our path of technology is the only path. We are a civilization of combustion, electronics, and disposable materials. Our entire industrial model is based on digging things up, burning them, using them for a short time, and then throwing them away. It is loud, dirty, and incredibly wasteful. What if a civilization, perhaps one with a much deeper understanding of the planet, developed in a completely different direction? What if their technology was not based on extraction and disposal, but on harmony, frequency, and permanence? Let's go back to the impossible megaliths. We are obsessed with how they were cut, but the greater mystery is how they were moved and placed. We're talking about 1,000-ton blocks quarried miles away and fitted with eerie precision. Our best theories involving ramps, rollers, and human labor strain credulity to the breaking point. We are looking at a lost art, a form of engineering so profound that we label it primitive simply because we cannot duplicate it. We are missing the ghost in the machine. What if the machine wasn't a crane, but a principle of physics we have yet to master? What if their technology was based on sound? The idea of acoustic levitation, of using specific frequencies and harmonic resonance to neutralize gravity and manipulate massive objects, appears again and again in the world's most ancient myths. These stories, from Egypt to Tibet, speak of priests and wise men using sound to build their greatest works. Is this a folk memory of a forgotten science? Was their technology a mastery of vibration? This idea of frequency as technology opens a new door. What if their power grid was not a web of copper wires, but an attunement to the planet itself? We know the Earth has its own natural electromagnetic field and telluric currents. What if this ancient civilization understood how to tap into this energy? How to build structures that were not just shelters, but resonators, designed to draw, concentrate, and transmit this planetary power? This would be a clean, wireless, global energy system, and its infrastructure would look nothing like our own. Suddenly, the anomalous design of the Great Pyramid of Giza makes a different kind of sense. Why build a 480-foot-tall structure of granite and limestone, aligned to true north with terrifying precision, with complex internal shafts and chambers, just for a single burial? What if its primary purpose wasn't as a tomb, but as a machine? A harmonic oscillator designed to interface with the Earth's energy field? This theory would reframe the persistent global myths of Vimana's ancient flying craft, not as fantasy, but as vehicles that perhaps ran on this very power grid. But there is a final, even bolder hypothesis. What if their highest technology was not external at all? Our entire civilization is built on creating tools, external extensions of our bodies. A hammer is an extension of our fist. A car, an extension of our legs. A computer, an extension of our brain. This path leads to a world full of complex things. What if they chose a different path? What if, instead of building external machines, they perfected the internal machine? What if their highest technology was a total mastery of human consciousness? This is not a mystical fantasy. It's the frontier of our own most advanced science. Quantum mechanics has shown us that, at a fundamental level, the observer and the observed are inextricably linked. Consciousness, it seems, plays a direct role in shaping physical reality. What if this lost civilization didn't just know this, but weaponized it? What if they had a functional, practical science of consciousness that allowed them to interact with the world in ways we would now call magic? We search for our own fingerprints in the past. We look for steel, plastic, and microchips, and when we don't find them, we declare the case closed. But what if their technology was based on stone, sound, and a state of being we've forgotten? Perhaps the evidence isn't missing. Perhaps we are standing on it. Perhaps we are living inside its ruins, calling its greatest achievements myth, because we are simply too primitive, too locked into our own way of thinking, to see the technology that is staring us in the face. So, we are left with a tantalizing hypothesis and a frustrating, deafening silence. The skeptic will rightly pound the table at this point and demand, "Show me the city. Show me one settlement." It is a powerful and logical demand. If a global, advanced civilization existed, its footprint should be everywhere. But this is precisely where the investigation leaves the realm of archaeology and enters a much more brutal discipline: geology. We've been looking for a lost civilization, but we've been ignoring the crime scene. And the crime scene is the planet Earth itself. There is a scientific field called taphonomy. It is, in essence, the study of death, decay, and burial. It investigates what happens to an organism, or in this case a civilization, after it dies. Taphonomy teaches us a very humbling lesson. The Earth is not a museum. It is a machine for recycling. It is a high-pressure, high-temperature, corrosive engine that grinds, dissolves, and buries almost everything. The preservation of anything, a fossil, a ruin, is a 1 in a billion miracle. The default state for 99.9% of everything that has ever lived is total erasure. Now let's run a thought experiment. Take our own sprawling, permanent civilization. Take our skyscrapers of steel and glass, our cities of concrete, our networks of plastic and silicon. Now press fast forward. What survives 12,000 years? Not our computers, not our cars. Our steel would rust into red dust. Our concrete, porous and fragile, would crumble and be mistaken for natural rock. Our plastics would degrade into a fine layer of toxic sediment. Even our mountains of glass would erode into sand. What might survive? The granite foundations of our government buildings, the ceramic of our kitchen sinks and bathroom tiles, and, of course, our truly massive megalithic structures, things like the Hoover Dam or the faces carved into Mount Rushmore. Suddenly, the ancient record makes a terrible, chilling kind of sense. The only things that could survive this filter of time are exactly the impossible things we do find. We find massive, inexplicable megalithic stone. We find sophisticated, almost indestructible ceramics. Perhaps our ancestors were not primitive for building with 50-ton blocks. Perhaps they were building for eternity. They were building to beat the filter. The reason we don't find their laptops is the same reason a future civilization, 12,000 years from now, will not find ours. We are simply looking for the wrong footprint. But this taphonomic filter of time is only half of the equation. It's the gentle part. The 12,000-year-old problem has a second, far more violent component: the water. As we established, the end of the Younger Dryas was not a gentle thaw. It was a deluge, a series of catastrophic meltwater pulses that raised the world's oceans by 400 feet. Plato was explicit. He described Atlantis as a maritime coastal civilization. And where do we build our own civilization? Not in the high, dry deserts or frozen mountains. We build along the coasts, at the mouths of great rivers. It's the same place any advanced, trade-based civilization would build. This is the most valuable real estate on the planet. This is the geologic barrier. This is the great filter. If a global coastal civilization existed 12,000 years ago, 99% of its cities, its ports, its infrastructure, and its people would now be under 400 feet of ocean water. And not just underwater. They would be underwater that has been churning for 12 millennia. That's 12,000 years of currents, 12,000 years of silt and sediment burying them, 12,000 years of coral reefs growing on top of them. We aren't just looking for a needle in a haystack. We are looking for a needle in a haystack that was then thrown into the ocean and buried under a mountain of mud. Let's run one more simulation. Imagine the city of New York today. Now abandon it. Let a massive tsunami, spawned by a melting ice cap, scour it clean. Then, submerge it under 400 feet of water. Now, let the silt of the Hudson River cover it for the next 12,000 years. What would a future explorer with a simple submarine see? They would see nothing. They would see a muddy, silty, unremarkable continental shelf. To find the ruins of Manhattan, they would need to know exactly where to look, and then drill deep beneath the ocean floor. This is why the lack of evidence argument is, quite simply, a failure of geological imagination. The default state for such a civilization would be invisibility. We can't find their cities for the same reason a fish can't find a bird. We are searching in the wrong element. We are a species with amnesia, searching for our own past in a library where 90% of the books have been locked in a submerged, time-locked vault. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. In this case, it is the most profound evidence we have for the nature of the cataclysm. A global cataclysm of this magnitude, the 400-foot sea level rise, would have been an extinction-level event. But it's almost inconceivable that it was a total extinction. A sophisticated, global, maritime civilization like the one Plato described would have had ships at sea, colonial outposts, and mountain strongholds. When the deluge came, not everyone would have died. A scattered, traumatized, and shattered remnant would have survived. They would be refugees, the inheritors of a broken world, washing up on shores that were, to them, a new land. These survivors would have faced an impossible predicament. They would possess the knowledge of a hyper-advanced world, the principles of mathematics, astronomy, agriculture, and perhaps technologies we still don't understand. But they would lack the population, the resources, and the industrial infrastructure to rebuild it. They would be a handful of geniuses in a world reset to zero, surrounded by primitive hunter-gatherer populations who had survived the chaos. What would you do? You wouldn't try to build a new laptop. You would try to preserve the knowledge of what was lost. This is the broken inheritance hypothesis. The survivors would have become teachers, desperately trying to pass down a legacy code of their lost civilization. And right here, we find one of the most baffling and persistent myths in the entire human record. All across the ancient world, from the Americas to Mesopotamia, the story of civilization's origin is identical. It begins after a great flood, when a civilizer god arrives, often from the sea, to teach the primitive survivors the arts of civilization. In Mesopotamia, he was Oannes, a half-fish, half-man who emerged from the Persian Gulf to teach humanity writing, law, medicine, and mathematics. In Egypt, he was Thoth, the giver of wisdom and the sacred texts after a great chaos. In the Andes, he was Viracocha, who came in a time of darkness, after a flood, to create a new humanity and teach them engineering. In Mesoamerica, he was Quetzalcoatl, the plumed serpent who brought the calendar and the gift of agriculture from a previous, drowned age. For centuries, we have dismissed these stories as primitive myths. But what if they are not myths at all? What if they are literal, historical memories? What if these civilizer gods were not gods, but the last, highly intelligent survivors of the Younger Dryas cataclysm? They were the last Atlanteans, traveling the world, seeking out the scattered remnants of humanity, and seeding them with the core knowledge of their lost world, hoping that one day it would blossom again. This hypothesis solves one of the single greatest mysteries in mainstream archaeology: the sudden start of civilization. We are taught a slow, gradual model of progress, but the archaeological record shows the opposite. The first civilizations in Egypt, Sumer, and the Indus Valley do not emerge slowly. They appear fully formed, as if from nowhere. The very first Egyptian dynasty, around 3100 BC, explodes onto the scene with advanced mathematics, hieroglyphic writing, a complex political system, and the engineering knowledge to build on a grand scale. The Sumerians, likewise, appear with a complete written language, complex astronomical calendars, and a sophisticated legal code already in place. There is no starter phase. There is no practice civilization. This out-of-the-blue phenomenon makes no sense, unless you accept that these cultures were not inventing civilization. They were inheriting it. They were the first societies to successfully receive, decrypt, and implement the legacy code left behind by the survivors of the last age. We may even have a physical monument to this legacy, one that stares us right in the face. We are all familiar with the Great Sphinx of Giza. Orthodox Egyptology dates it to around 2500 BC, built by the pharaoh Khafre. But there is a glaring geological problem. The Sphinx and the walls of its enclosure are covered in deep vertical fissures. This is not the horizontal wind and sand erosion you would expect in a desert. This is the distinct, unmistakable pattern of water erosion caused by thousands of years of heavy, sustained rainfall. Here is the problem. The Sahara has been a hyperarid desert for the last 5,000 years. To get the kind of rainfall needed to create this erosion, geologists like Dr. Robert Schoch have argued you must go back. Way back. You must go back to a time before the desert formed, to a wetter period between 7,000 and 10,000 BC. This evidence suggests the Sphinx is not a product of the Egyptian civilization we know, but a much older, pre-dynastic, pre-flood monument that the pharaohs simply found, revered, and repaired. It is a silent witness, a relic from the age of the civilizer gods, looking back at us from a time before our history began. We have traveled to the edge of the last ice age. We have sifted through the geological wreckage of a planetary cataclysm and listened for the faint echoes of a legacy code in our most ancient myths. We have hunted for the ghost of a lost civilization. But perhaps in all this we have been asking the wrong questions. The ultimate value of this search, the reason this story has haunted humanity for over 2 millennia, may have nothing to do with the past. It may have everything to do with us right now. Let's return, for a final time, to Plato. His story of Atlantis, whether absolutely true or a work of fiction, was never intended as a simple history lesson. It was, at its core, a profound and desperate cautionary tale. He was writing to his own people, to the Athenians, warning them about the path they were on. He was, in effect, holding up a mirror, and in it, he showed them the ultimate fate of a civilization that had lost its way. Think about his description. He described a civilization that was, by every measure, the pinnacle of its world. It was a marvel of engineering, technologically brilliant, capable of building a magnificent capital of concentric rings of land and water. It was materially wealthy, with a global trading empire that brought it all the riches of the earth. But, as Plato writes, this material perfection was not enough. They became spiritually corrupt. They grew arrogant, filled with unseemly greed and power, and in their hubris, made war upon the gods. Does any of this sound familiar? We, too, are a civilization of technological brilliance. We alter the atom, we build in the sky, and we are creating artificial intelligences with godlike potential. We, too, possess unprecedented material wealth, a global empire of commerce that connects every corner of the planet. And we, too, are haunted by a creeping spiritual sickness, a crisis of meaning, and an arrogance that leads us to believe we are separate from and superior to the natural world that sustains us. We, in every meaningful way, are Atlantis. Plato's story ends in catastrophe. For their hubris, the gods turned against them. The civilization was destroyed, swallowed by the sea in a single terrible day and night of earthquakes and floods. For us, this is the most chilling part of the mirror. We don't need to invent vengeful gods to see the same cataclysmic end approaching. We have become our own gods, and we are our own executioners. We are manufacturing our own great flood, in the form of melting ice caps and rising sea levels, a direct consequence of our own industrial arrogance. Our earthquakes are the social and political tremors that shake the foundations of our global order. Our fire from the sky is not a comet, but the thousands of nuclear warheads we keep pointed at each other. A self-imposed apocalypse waiting on a single human error. Our advanced technologies, from artificial intelligence to genetic engineering, hold the very real promise of our own self-destruction, an end that could come just as swiftly as the one Plato described. In the end, it doesn't matter if you believe Atlantis was a real, physical place, buried under 12,000 years of water and time. The legend endures because it is not a story about the past. It is a mirror. It is a story about us. It's a recurring pattern, a cyclical warning that is whispered from one age to the next. That technological brilliance without wisdom is a death sentence. That material power without spiritual humility is the path to ruin. The search for Atlantis, then, is not the search for a lost city. It is the search for ourselves. It is a desperate attempt to look into the deep past, to find a ghost, and to ask it, how did you fail? The true, terrifying question this investigation forces us to ask is not, did they exist? Or were they advanced? The question is, are we going to make the same mistake? The question is, when our civilization falls, and all civilizations eventually do, what will we leave behind? Will there be anything for the next cycle to find? Will we leave any legacy code for a future shattered humanity to rebuild with? Or will our entire, magnificent, arrogant story be ground to dust by the geologic filter? Will the only trace of our billion-member, globe-spanning empire be a thin layer of plastic, a faint radioactive signature in the rock, and a few broken myths of a golden age that called itself modern, before it was lost forever to its own pride?